You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Now, one of the problems of a great story of huge consequence, particularly one that sticks around for a while, is that it elbows out all other happenings in the world at the same time, focusing all attention on itself. So it is, obviously, with the Russian war in Ukraine. But there are other stories, and we're going to take a little time in the Inside the Headlines segment to pay attention to one of them very close to home, which is pay equity. We just passed, on March 15th, Equal Pay Day. And of course, it's still not there for women, and even worse, not there for women of color. But we're going to tell you some things about pay equity that you probably did not know, even though you've been fighting for it a long time. Then my special guest for today's conversation is Dr. Kyleanne Hunter, who, among many other things, which I'll tell you about later, is also an adjunct professor of security studies at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. And she was the former chair of Employment and Integration Subcommittee for the Secretary of Defense's Advisory Committee of Women in the Services, otherwise known as DACOITS, and was part of the Department of Veterans Affairs inaugural class of Hello Women Veteran Trailblazers, and named as one of the Hill Vets 100 Most Influential Veterans. She serves on the advisory board of the Impact Peace, and she's an all-around terrific former combat pilot. Anyway, she will be with us later, and since she is a military strategist, we're going to talk about military strategy and related items in terms of the war. And then, in Fighting Words, we're going to take on the subject of courage. So, stick with us, but before we do any of that, we need to go into and behind the headlines. In 2020, the average woman working full-time, year-round, earned 83 cents for every dollar paid to their average male counterpart. Compared with the average man working full-time, year-round, disparities are even greater for Black women, Native American women and Latinas, as well as certain subpopulations of Asian American women. So this is not good, and this just past Equal Pay Day, the Vice President hosted a virtual summit. And she brought together partners across the country who are taking critical steps to tackle pay discrimination and create good-paying jobs and support families. So the Biden-Harris administration, I do love saying that, is announcing new actions to promote women's employment and support working families across the country. And these actions will do the following. And I'm just going to dash down the list and sample some things from it. Advance pay equity for the federal workforce. A proposed regulation will address the use of prior salary history in the hiring and pay-setting process for federal employees, consistent with the President's executive order on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. Banning the use of prior salary history can help break the cycle of past arbitrary and potentially discriminatory pay that follows women and workers of color from job to job, thus entrenching gender and racial pay gaps over time. Also, promote efforts to achieve pay equity for job applicants and employees of federal contractors. President Biden is going to sign an executive order directing the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, all these sub-agencies and bureaucracies, but still, they get it done, I don't care, to consider enhancing pay equity and transparency, including by limiting or prohibiting federal contractors from seeking and considering information about job applicants and employees' existing or past compensation. strengthen pay equity audits by federal contractors. The Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs issued a new directive clarifying federal contractors' annual obligation to analyze their compensation practices. And this kind of conducting these pay equity audits helps address and prevent pay disparities based on sex, race, or ethnicity. Ensure equitable access to good-paying jobs. The Department of Labor issued a report analyzing the impact that women's concentration in low-wage sectors and their relative underrepresentation in many well-paying occupations has on their overall economic security and on wage gaps. And the report finds that in 2019, black women lost $39.3 billion, with a B, dollars, and Latinas lost $46.7 billion in wages compared to white men due to differences in industry and occupation. And such segregation intensified the pandemic's disproportionate impact on women, in part due to the overrepresentation of women in hard-hit industries like hospitality. Address discrimination against caregivers. Of course, this is a huge one, particularly because discrimination against applicants and employees has been based on pandemic-related caregiving responsibilities, and that may violate federal employment discrimination laws. Additionally, the actions that had been announced that the administration is taking to advance pay equity include providing immediate relief through the American Rescue Plan, ARP, to millions of women who have borne the brunt of the pandemic. And this work includes standing up a historic vaccination program that has fully vaccinated more than 215 million Americans, and reopening schools and providing direct payments to individuals and expanding nutrition programs for families and providing paid leave tax credits for small and mid-sized employers. So, also helping keep child care providers open and boosting pay for child care workers. States have already delivered American Rescue Plan stabilization grants to more than 150,000 child care providers serving more than 5 million children and their families. And one survey found that 92% of providers receiving funds relied on them to help stay open, and nearly half used them to repay debt incurred during the pandemic. Provided tax relief to help families with child care costs during the pandemic by delivering a historic increase in the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit, that's CDCTC, to support millions of working families this tax season. It goes on and on. Increase the minimum wage. Well, there you go, to $15 per hour for federal workers and contractors, benefiting many women and people of color. The president issued executive orders directing the administration to put all effort into ensuring that employees working on federal contracts and federal employees earned a $15 per hour minimum wage. And his directives went into effect in January, raising the wages of about 370,000 federal employees and employees of federal contractors. Signed into law the bipartisan infrastructure law, which means that administration investments through that law are going to increase good-paying jobs, including for women. Issued an executive order to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility across the federal government, which includes prioritizing efforts to close gender and racial wage gaps, addressing workplace safety and harassment, including in our national security workforce, and advancing equity for LGB, etc., public servants. Issued an executive order on promoting competition in the American economy, which established the administration's policy of addressing anti-competitive behavior in labor markets. Remember when Biden said capitalism without competition is exploitation? So these are some of the things that have already passed, have already been signed into executive order, by executive order into existence, or are being worked on full-time, frothing at the mouth, full speed by the Biden-Harris administration. And that's really good news to have that much energy and action after so long on pay equity. It's not enough, but it sure as hell is a beginning. We have to pause here for just a moment, but we will return with much more, with a great conversation with Dr. Kyleanne Hunter, and with, at the end of the program, Fighting Words. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My special guest for the conversation today is Dr. Kyleanne Hunter. She's a Marine Corps combat veteran with multiple combat deployments as a Super Cobra attack pilot. She finished her active duty time in the Marine Corps Legislative Liaison Office in the House of Representatives, and she is Assistant Professor of Military and Strategic Studies at the U.S. Air Force Academy and co-director of the Athena Leadership Project. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown and a Master of Arts and a doctorate from University of Denver's Corbell School of International Studies. And her research focuses on the intersection of social integration and military effectiveness with a focus, wait for it, on gender and unconventional warfare. And she was a researcher in residence at University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace and Justice and co-primary investigator for the Nonviolent Actors in Violent Conflicts Project, funded by the Carnegie Foundation. Her writing has been published in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, etc., and she's the co-editor of Invisible Veterans, What Happens When Women Become Civilians Again. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Kyleanne Hunter. Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here, though, as always, I wish it was under better circumstances for the world right now.
Yes. Oh, hell yes, yeah. But let's get right to it, because you are an expert in so many areas, all of which fascinate me. For the moment, I'll leave the fact that you were a Cobra attack pilot aside, which terrifies me, but I admire it, but it terrifies me. And go right to the research that you do, which focuses on the intersection of social integration and military effectiveness with a focus on gender and unconventional warfare, according to your extremely impressive CV. Tell me about that. What is unconventional warfare with a focus on gender? I like it already, but tell me.
All right. Absolutely. And thank you again for the kind introduction and having me here. When we think about gender and unconventional warfare, this is really a extension of a lot of the sort of formal work that has been done on the importance of women in the military, right? So a lot of that work started from really looking at around World War II and thinking about the sort of whole of society approach, the need for everyone to have a part in the war effort. But how I've taken it and really have expanded on that work is looking not just at the sort of what is the kind of free a man to fight type idea behind having women involved in the war effort,
right,
but what real particulars of women's lived experiences are essential for understanding how we conduct warfare, but also for understanding how we get to more lasting peace and more beneficial outcomes by actually giving women a voice of their lived experiences.
Oh my God.
And when we think about and when we think about unconventional warfare, why it's so important, and we see this happening in Ukraine right now, is that there's not a separation between battlefields and people's homes and lives. And women's experiences had always been thought of as the domestic, the home front.
Of course.
Well, what happens when the war zone is the home front?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, and how are we elevating those lived experiences so that we can prevent tragedies like this from happening again?
Oh, this is so exciting. In other words, it's like, you remember I'm sure you do, the lionesses in I guess Afghanistan and in Iraq were a group.
Absolutely.
Were a group. Well, you can probably explain it better than I. But as I remember, they were a group of women in the military who would go into homes and houses and be more welcome because they were women, and act more welcome and more deserving of welcome because they were women. And they would give and get both information about the whereabouts of whatever, snipers, terrorists, etc., that the men could not get because, of course, that was a real dividing line. So when the public comes to the private realm where women have always been constrained, and vice versa, that's a whole new world. And that leads a lot to peace, which I notice is a refrain in your CV, which is interesting for somebody as well-versed in the military as you are.
Well, absolutely. And when people often even ask me why I joined the military and still am deeply, deeply connected to military work, it is because I believe in peace. And I think that the best way to have a credible voice in the peace dialogue and narrative is to understand how to prevent war. And in order to do that, you need to understand and elevate the lived experiences of those from military and civil society who have to experience its horror.
Wow. Oh, this is so heartening somehow. I mean, it feels like a breath of fresh air in an extremely crowded and stinky otherwise attic. That's a hell of a metaphor, but you know what I mean.
I like that. I might steal that one.
Okay. And you were the former chair of the Employment and Integration Committee for the Secretary of Defense's Advisory Committee of Women in the Services of Dakowitz. So you've also been an active feminist. So clearly in your mind and in your life, women bring to the table, not because we are inherently this or that or more peaceable, but a very different lived experience that would be useful, boys, if it was applied even to war. What do we do looking at the situation in Ukraine? I'm going to ask you the same things I asked Nina Khrushcheva last week. Is there an exit strategy? What is it? What is the way out? Clearly, I, for one, am grateful that Biden didn't take us into World War III and is resisting that. But I don't know what else would do, and as the situation gets more desperate, I fear that the pressure will be greater on him. What's your thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, globally, it's a really tough situation, right? And I think there are historical political forces, economic forces, military forces at play that long outstretched the current administration and administrations previously. But I think if we're looking at to start looking at why women are important and what needs to be done, and I think really to your point, how women's lived experiences are essential and are a key part to understanding the conflict. I mean, we need to first start by really looking at what separates Putin's worldview from what I would say is a more beneficial worldview that we should be holding.
Yeah.
Putin has been focusing a lot on hypermasculinization campaigns. When we look at how we need to be leveraging women in ways that we aren't right now, that ideology and that mindset is also a critical vulnerability for Russia, because he has a very narrow view of what security actually looks like and what success looks like. And so I think we need more women at the table here to be able to outmaneuver him. Continuing to have, the same type of worldview, bringing more masculine worldviews to try to counter his masculine worldview isn't going to do it. Women are able to maneuver into spaces that men can't in this way, that they are actually able to have an impact. There's also something, because of this public-private divide, that is very powerful of, watching a woman get arrested as a foil to this very militaristic idea, right? I mean, what just especially when we look at like the ballerina, which is such a Russian archetype of femininity, this iconic cultural, star is juxtaposed to this, that represents really what I would say is all is good about Russian culture, right? We look at the literature, the art, right? Like there was a very beautiful art scene that Russian culture has given us. And it is juxtaposed against this horrific, barbaric war machine. And when we talk unconventional warfare, this power of culture becomes so important in creating off-ramps from violence that we can have.
I mean, it seems to me that the sexual politics divide is clearer in this conflict almost than it's ever been. It's always there. And it certainly is there if you look for it. But here, it's there in just so many ways. And it's there in terms of 98% of the refugees are women and children. It's there in we've named some of the other ways. But give me an example of how it could be applicable. Is it applicable in bringing Putin out of power?
Yeah, so I think when we look at this and its importance of getting a way out, I think there is, when we look at how removing Putin from power can have, women are powerful in getting leaders out of power. And I think we even look at our own country and the power of women, particularly women of color, to vote out some pretty horrific administrations that we saw, right? So women's power at the ballot box, and there's a misnomer that women just follow the whims of their husbands. What we see is that's actually very inaccurate. That's there. Yeah. But I think more importantly, what this provides is a meaningful, negotiable discussion. If we get women to the table and we bring women to the table, I firmly believe we will be presented with a negotiating deal that will create a more lasting peace. And I think even when we're talking about some of the sexual political divide that we're seeing here, we see it even in how conscription is being done, right? That both with the fact that in Russia, the army is largely young men conscripts, and in Ukraine, men were told to stay at home and fight. Right, that was an order that was given. Yeah. What's missing from this conversation is the fact that Ukrainian women care just about as much about their homeland as their male counterparts do.
Exactly.
And so they offer, especially as they are making their way into Poland and the rest of the European Union, they offer an essential pressure point to put on the European countries to actually negotiate for a homeland. This isn't just about a domestic setting. This is about them being able to to leverage what Ukraine means to them, their jobs, their livelihoods,
precisely,
their families. Yeah. And so that's a key part of it. It also is, there's a negotiating Chip, that we're not really leveraging and looking at the fact that we're seeing mass casualties on both the Russian and the Ukrainian side. And the amount of men that are likely going to die from this is going to have population ripple effects. And
Exactly.
I think looking at the conflicts in Bosnia, we saw this happen as well, right? Because we focused on evacuating women and children and we left men to die, there is a real population impact on there.
Right.
And that's another essential bargaining chip that I think needs to be brought to the table of you're destroying the future to actually be able to continue to have a culture and a country. And having that's a piece of the conversation in terms of negotiating power that's very, very powerful that women can bring to the table right now.
Wow. Well, this is fascinating stuff that you're talking about, and if I may, I will return to you a number of times so that we can go even deeper into this. Thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live, and take care of yourself, and we'll be back. Okay?
All right, my pleasure, and I really look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
We have to pause here for another short break, but I will be back in just a moment with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Courage. Now, there's a fighting word. Let me set the stage for this action. Vladimir Putin, president of the Russian Federation, former KGB spy network officer, and for the past 22 years leader of his country, now an autocracy. He is tightening the noose. Some Americans were quite surprised to realize that so much Americana was all over Russia, particularly in the cities, from CNN to McDonald's, from Ford and Adidas to Coca-Cola and rappers. Well, of course they're all over Russia and have been in an increasing presence for years, even if now, as they're withdrawing from that country, some Americans are only learning that they were there in the first place. But Americans were aware that there seemed over the years to be an awkward, uneasy peace with the former Soviet Union. Not a cuddly warmth, mind you, but decidedly an end to the Cold War. Except that in recent years, climate change was sensed there too, and not just in the planetary environment. Putin's noose has been getting tighter every year, as has his control of the Russian populace. The adulation in which he was held by Donald Trump mystified Americans and only heightened the intensifying unease, particularly since Putin dispatched his adversaries, even when they were abroad in other countries, by poison, by assassination, and never denied it. And when he invaded Chechnya and carpet-bombed the city of Grozny, and when he blatantly annexed Crimea in 2014. Yet previous American presidents, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and certainly Trump, chose to sanction Putin, yet looked the other way. The hope was that things would get better with enough diplomacy and enough time. Hillary, by the way, knew better. Oh, he hated her. So, now here we are. His limited military action, as he put it, to supposedly liberate 2 provinces in eastern Ukraine, has somehow mystically morphed into a massive assault on the entire country, while he saber rattles his nuclear warheads and rails against all opposition, including, perhaps even particularly, internal opposition. This past Wednesday, he referred to pro-Western Russians as, quote, scum and traitors, close quote, who needed to be removed from society. He described the war in Ukraine as part of an existential clash with the United States and compared the West to Nazi Germany with derision for the, quote, political beau monde in Europe and the European Union, and for the slave-like Russians who supported it, close quote. Interestingly, apparently he's ignorant of the etymology, in English at least. Well, in most Latin-based languages, the word slave has as its root Slav, because the Romans embedded that in Latin when they took and enslaved Slavic peoples. When Putin reserved his toughest language for Russians who disagreed with him, he signaled that he was opening the door to a new wave of repression, and indeed, beginnings of a new crackdown quickly became evident. Authorities announced a criminal case against a popular lifestyle blogger, very Western, Veronika Belatskarovsky, for her anti-war Instagram posts that supposedly discredited the state authorities and the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Putin also blocked access to the website of BBC News and vowed that this was just the beginning of his response to an information war unleashed by the West against Russia. He said he would fight back, and he inveighed against a, quote, fifth column of treacherous Russians whose allegiances are with the West. Then, a day or so later, he reprised the theme with great intensity. He suggested that any Russian with ties to the West could be considered a traitor, and he announced that Russia would do well to, quote, purify, close quote, itself of such traitors. He likened them, the traitors, to flies who fly into your mouth but which you must spit out. The use of this particular dehumanizing language is genuinely frightening. That a citizenry should purify itself of pests. How chillingly reminiscent of Nazi Germany, of fascist language. That has risen and now walks among us. So, that's the scene. That's the climate. Into this scene steps a woman who by now you've heard of. You've heard of her because this employee of Russia's Channel 1, a state-run television channel and the most watched channel in the country, has become world famous. Her name is Marina Ovsyannikova. She was an editor and producer with Channel 1, and she has been so far able to give only one interview as of now to Kyleanne Hunter, so these quotes come from her own video that she left behind after her action, and from statements made in that interview. Once the news broadcast was on the air, she emerged, dodging the production assistants on the floor and carrying a large cardboard sign on which in English and Russian she had scrawled the words, "No war." She stood directly behind the confused anchorwoman and said, "They are lying to you here. This is all propaganda." Later, in the video that she left, she said, "Unfortunately, I have been working at Channel 1 during recent years on Kremlin propaganda, and now I am very ashamed that I've allowed the lies to be said on TV screens. I am ashamed that I let the Russian people be zombified. It is only in our power to stop this madness." She added, "Take to the streets. Do not be afraid. They can't jail us all." Apparently she'd been a child in Chechnya, And at age 12, she remembered keenly the sound of bombs falling around her school and how the family had to flee the country. Years later, now a grown woman, she'd grown more and more uncomfortable and finally anguished by working at Channel One. I imagine that particularly as an editor, knowing what she would have to cut from reports, it was especially painful for her, since it must have made her feel like a collaborator in propaganda, which indeed she was, in effect. Her father was Ukrainian, her mother Russian, and that mother apparently had been so, as her daughter put it, brainwashed by the propaganda that no reasonable dialogue about the war in Ukraine was even possible with her. All this accumulated sorrow, guilt, anger, and, yes, shame drove her to that dramatic act. Well, she was, of course, immediately arrested and held overnight incommunicado, unable even to contact her lawyer. But the next day in court, after her interrogation, she was temporarily released after paying a fine of approximately only $280. This seems pretty light, but then again she was not charged with a criminal act. Yet. Possibly because Putin fears making her into a martyr. In the interview with Amanpour, she explained that she had been feeling, quote, a cognitive dissonance more and more between my beliefs and what we say on air. The war was the point of no return when it was simply impossible to stay silent. Close quote. She said she wasn't scared now, although she had been afraid in the TV studio up until the last minute when she overcame the guard who stood in front of the doors and dashed in behind the sitting host. She added, quote, what is happening now in Ukraine is a crime, and Russia is the aggressor country, and the responsibility for this aggression lies in the conscience of only one person. This man is Vladimir Putin. I am ashamed that we kept silent in 2014 when all this was beginning. Period, close quote. The whole world is applauding Marina today because the eyes of the world are on her. But as time goes by and other news breaks to distract that public and nudge her off the headlines, what will happen? I think that's when Putin will move against her, and against the countrywomen and the countrymen who oppose him, against Olga Smirnova, who has quit the Bolshoi Ballet, where she was a star ballerina before she denounced the war, saying, a line has been drawn, and moving to the Dutch National Ballet in Amsterdam. I think that's when he will move against the grandmothers who demonstrated for peace in St. Petersburg. I think that's when he will move with the full force of his promised and threatened 15-year prison sentence against Marina Ovsyannikova. So this program will stay on her story. We'll keep reminding ourselves and you every step of the way what happens to her. Because Marina's is not a courage of firearms, a courage of aerial bombardments. Hers is the courage of bearing witness, of feeling the fear and doing it anyway, of speaking painful truths. It's the courage of presence. It's often a woman's kind of courage. That's a quiet courage, easily overlooked and swiftly forgotten. We will not forget. We will not let you forget. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. We'll be on hiatus next week, but the week after that, we'll be right back here. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.